Anna Lawson had spent years building a quiet, stable life for herself and her aging father, Richard. After her mother's passing, Anna knew she couldn't leave her father to fend for himself in a city apartment filled with stairs and traffic noise. She invested her savings into a modest one-story home, tucked at the edge of a small suburban neighborhood, surrounded by tall maples and winding streets where children still played, until the streetlights flickered on. The house was old, but it carried the kind of warmth that made strangers slow down as they drove by. It had a wraparound porch, a slightly sloping lawn, and most importantly, wide enough access for emergency vehicles. Something Anna had made sure of before signing the papers. Richard's health was fragile after years of struggling with heart disease, and Anna knew that every minute could make the difference between life and death. She had spent months carefully preparing the house. Ramps instead of stairs, widened doors, a medical alert system directly linked to local emergency services. Everything was thought out, structured, safe. They had neighbors, too. Friendly enough in passing, nodding hellos and short conversations about the weather or the state of the community garden. Most of them kept to themselves, valuing the quiet as much as Anna did. All except one, Karen Sanders. Karen was impossible to ignore. She lived 2 doors down in a white 2-story house with a badly leaning fence and a front yard cluttered with old patio furniture, broken ceramic planters, and the occasional plastic holiday decoration, no matter the season. She was in her 60s, heavy-set, and always seemed to move with the frantic energy of someone perpetually offended by the world. From the day Anna moved in, Karen made it clear that she saw herself as the self-appointed guardian of the block. At first, it was small things. Passive-aggressive comments about where Anna parked her car, suggestions about how to trim her hedges. Then came the long, unsolicited lectures about community standards and how things used to be before newcomers ruined it. Anna, not wanting conflict, smiled politely and kept her distance, chalking it up to the usual eccentricities of aging. Neighbors. She assumed Karen's bark was worse than her bite. But what Anna didn't realize was that Karen's need for control ran far deeper, fueled by years of unchecked entitlement and a burning resentment toward anyone she saw as a threat to her dominion over the neighborhood. To Karen, even the smallest perceived slights were personal affronts, challenges to her unspoken authority. The first major warning sign came on a crisp autumn evening when an Amazon delivery van accidentally pulled slightly onto the grassy edge of Karen's yard while backing out of Anna's driveway. Karen stormed out of her house, screaming at the young driver, taking pictures and threatening to call the police for property damage because 2 blades of her overgrown lawn had been bent. Anna apologized, tried to mediate, but Karen's fury didn't subside. That night, Anna lay awake realizing that Karen wasn't just difficult. She was vindictive. Still, Anna reasoned, as long as she kept a respectful distance, no real harm could come. After all, this was a quiet neighborhood. It was a place meant for healing, for second chances, for peace. Anna had no way of knowing then that Karen would soon cross a line so severe, so cruel, that it would endanger not just Anna's carefully built life, but her father's very survival. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, a day that had started so peacefully that Anna almost allowed herself to believe they were finally settling into the life she had envisioned when they first moved in. Her father was sitting on the porch enjoying the last weak rays of autumn sun, wrapped in a thick sweater, a mug of tea warming his frail hands. Anna was inside cleaning up the kitchen, keeping half an ear out for him in case he needed help. It was during the simple act of reaching for a new roll of paper towels that she heard it. A strange, heavy clatter, followed by the unmistakable sound of something falling. She dropped everything and ran outside, finding her father crumpled at the base of the porch steps, his face pale, his lips tinged an alarming shade of blue. Without hesitation, Anna pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed 911, her voice urgent but steady as she gave their address, explaining in short, clipped sentences that her father had collapsed and wasn't breathing properly. The dispatcher was calm, promising that an ambulance was already en route and instructing her on basic CPR procedures until help arrived. Anna knelt beside her father, following every instruction, but fear gnawed at the edge of her focus. Seconds stretched into minutes as she worked, counting compressions, praying under her breath. Finally, she heard the distant whine of sirens weaving through the suburban streets. She felt an enormous wave of relief threaten to collapse her as the flashing lights came into view at the far end of the block. The ambulance turned onto their street and stopped. Anna looked up, confused, her hands never leaving her father's chest. Through the trees and the parked cars, she could barely make out the flashing lights idling 100 feet away. And then she saw why. Karen had blocked the road. Somehow, impossibly fast, she had dragged a battered, rusted trailer. Something that once might have been a boat carrier but now resembled a collapsing pile of metal and rotting wood. Into the center of the narrow street. Next to it, she had placed 2 homemade signs, hastily painted with the words, "Private property, no access." As if she had prepared for this moment, waiting for the chance to wield her grievance like a weapon. Anna's mouth went dry as she saw the EMTs step out of the ambulance, gesturing in frustration, trying to reason with Karen. Even from a distance, Anna could hear Karen's shrill, grating voice carrying across the yards. "This is my land! Emergency or not, they have no right to trespass." Anna's instincts screamed at her to run to them, to tear down the blockade with her bare hands if necessary. But she couldn't abandon her father. She had to stay, had to keep applying pressure, had to keep him alive until help arrived. She shouted, waving her arms, trying to get the EMT's attention, but the trailer and Karen's bulk formed a wall between them. One of the paramedics tried to climb over the mess, nearly twisting an ankle on the loose boards. Another called for backup, reporting civilian obstruction of emergency response, a phrase that would later appear in every report filed that day. The minutes crawled by with cruel indifference. Anna's muscles ached, her arms trembling from the effort of CPR, but she refused to stop. Finally, 2 firefighters from the station a few blocks over arrived, forcing Karen back with legal threats, dragging the wreckage out of the way enough for the ambulance to squeeze past. By the time the EMTs reached Anna, her father's pulse was faint, thready, and his breathing so shallow it was almost imperceptible. They worked quickly, securing oxygen, preparing to transport him to the nearest hospital. But Anna could see it in their faces. Every lost second had cost them something critical. As they loaded Richard onto the stretcher, Anna caught a glimpse of Karen standing off to the side, arms crossed, lips pursed in a look of grim satisfaction, as if she genuinely believed she had done something righteous. Anna's heart burned with fury and helplessness, but she said nothing. She knew the priority now was her father's survival. There would be time later for consequences. As the ambulance finally sped away, sirens tearing at the cool afternoon air, Anna climbed into her car, her hands still trembling, and followed them to the hospital, vowing silently that this would not be forgotten, that Karen's actions, her choice, to endanger a man's life for the sake of petty control now would not go unanswered. Anna spent the night in a hard plastic chair in the corner of her father's hospital room, her legs cramping and her back aching, but she barely noticed. The slow, rhythmic beeping of the monitors was the only sound she trusted now, each chirp confirming that her father was still there, still fighting. Doctors had managed to stabilize him, but the attending physician was blunt. The delay in emergency intervention had put Richard dangerously close to irreversible cardiac arrest. Had it taken another few minutes, they might have lost him entirely. Anna listened, nodded, thanked them numbly, but inside her mind was already shifting into a colder, sharper place. A place where emotion gave way to calculation. When morning came, she didn't waste time. After confirming with the nurses that Richard was stable enough to be left for a few hours, she made her way directly to the local police department. She didn't want apologies. She didn't want vague promises. She wanted an official report filed, on record, describing exactly what had happened the day before. At the police station, Anna was professional, precise, and utterly focused. She explained the situation to the desk sergeant without embellishment, providing the names of the paramedics and the responding firefighters, insisting that the report note that emergency services had been delayed due to civilian obstruction. She showed them photos, the ones taken by the firefighters, of Karen's makeshift barricade and her hand-painted signs. The officer, a middle-aged man with a thinning hairline and a face weathered by years of dealing with community disputes, listened carefully, typing notes with deliberate precision. When Anna finished speaking, he promised to attach the complaint to a formal investigation request. It was only then that Anna allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe now, finally, someone would take this seriously. But hope proved to be a fragile thing. The very next afternoon, when Anna returned briefly home to collect some clothes and personal items, she found a bright orange notice pinned to her front door. It was a municipal complaint, filed anonymously, accusing her of improper vehicle storage and creating a public nuisance. Anna stood there in disbelief, staring at the absurd document. She knew immediately who was behind it. No one else in the neighborhood had ever complained about her. She parked in her own driveway. She kept her property clean and orderly. This was Karen, retaliating, shifting tactics from direct confrontation to bureaucratic harassment. Still, Anna refused to be baited into a shouting match. She documented everything: the notice, the time it was delivered, even the security camera footage from a neighbor's house showing Karen loitering suspiciously near her porch earlier that day. Instead of reacting emotionally, Anna took the footage and the notice directly to the city compliance office. She spoke calmly but firmly to the officials there, explaining the pattern of harassment she had endured and supplying supporting evidence. She requested in writing that any future anonymous complaints against her property be verified by independent inspection before action was taken. The clerk behind the counter, perhaps used to dealing with frantic rants, seemed genuinely impressed by Anna's methodical presentation. He assured her the matter would be flagged for further review. But Karen was not finished. 2 days later, Anna received a knock on her hospital room door. It was a plainclothes officer, polite but visibly uncomfortable. He explained that Karen had filed a civil complaint accusing Anna of reckless endangerment for supposedly directing the ambulance to trespass on private land, causing property damage in the process. Anna almost laughed at the absurdity of it if the situation weren't so enraging. Here she was, sitting beside her critically ill father, and Karen was trying to twist the facts to paint herself as the victim. Anna's lawyer, a woman named Michelle Langley, came highly recommended by the hospital's patient advocacy team. Michelle was young but carried herself with a calm authority that instantly reassured Anna. When Anna laid out everything, the obstruction, the barricade, the harassment, the civil complaint, Michelle listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and then began mapping out a plan of action. They would file a counterclaim, citing obstruction of emergency services, negligence, and emotional distress. They would request affidavits from the paramedics and firefighters who had been delayed. They would submit the neighbor's security footage as evidence of malicious intent. And they would demand a formal restraining order, preventing Karen from interfering with Anna's property or emergency access in the future. Michelle warned Anna that the process would be exhausting. Karen clearly thrived on drama and would likely escalate once she realized her tactics were being turned against her. But Anna was beyond the point of intimidation. Every time she looked at her father lying in that hospital bed, every time she remembered the long, agonizing minutes kneeling beside him with no help in sight, her resolve hardened further. Meanwhile, Karen began a campaign of whispers among the other neighbors. Anna could see them now. Little clusters on the sidewalks, furtive glances toward her house, the quiet murmur of gossip. Karen claimed that Anna had endangered everyone by allowing the ambulance to damage community property. She spun tales of Anna being unstable, combative, even dangerous. It was a cowardly strategy, and it might have worked if not for two crucial factors. First, most of the neighbors liked Anna. She was polite, unobtrusive, the kind of neighbor everyone hoped for. Second, Karen's behavior had long been a sore point in the community. This incident was not her first brush with unreasonable behavior, merely the most serious. A few brave neighbors began approaching Anna privately, offering their support, some even willing to testify if it came to it. An older man down the block, Mr. Hargrove, recounted how Karen had once tried to block his moving truck because it made the street look like a junkyard. Another neighbor, a young mother named Tanya, said Karen had threatened to call CPS because Tanya's toddler had drawn on the sidewalk with chalk. Piece by piece, the ugly mosaic of Karen's pattern of behavior was coming together, and Anna's case against her was growing stronger by the day. Still, Anna knew this was only the beginning. Karen would not give up easily. She would twist, lie, manipulate, anything to avoid facing consequences. But Anna was no longer the polite, conflict-averse neighbor Karen had once underestimated. She was a woman who had nearly watched her father die because someone else thought their petty grievances outweighed a human life. And she was ready to fight, using every lawful tool at her disposal until justice was finally served. The first hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later, held in the stark, sterile chambers of the local civil court. Anna sat quietly beside Michelle Langley at the long table, papers neatly stacked in front of them, her heart pounding in her chest, but her expression carefully composed. Across the aisle, Karen loomed at her own table, her posture stiff, her arms folded tightly over her massive chest, glaring daggers at Anna every time their eyes met. She wore a garish floral dress several sizes too small and had slathered herself in makeup, perhaps hoping to present herself as some sympathetic matron wronged by a cruel neighbor. Her lawyer, an oily-looking man named Raymond Kessler, leaned in constantly to whisper in her ear, though Karen often responded with impatient waves of her hand, clearly believing she could handle matters herself. The judge, an older woman with a no-nonsense air and a reputation for disliking theatrics, entered and immediately set the tone. Facts, not emotions, would dictate the outcome today. Michelle opened methodically, presenting the timeline of events supported by documentation. The 911 call logs, statements from the paramedics and firemen, security footage from the neighbors, photos of the blockade. She spoke with calm authority, never raising her voice, never allowing Karen's muttered interruptions from across the aisle to rattle her. When Michelle submitted a notarized affidavit from the fire captain confirming the obstruction and describing the difficulty they faced getting the ambulance to Anna's home, the judge's eyebrows rose slightly. When she played the neighbor's camera footage showing Karen dragging debris into the street while the sirens approached, the courtroom fell utterly silent. Karen's defense, by contrast, was a rambling disaster. Raymond Kessler attempted to argue that the trailer had always been part of her landscaping, and that Karen was simply defending her property rights. He produced a battered, outdated plat map from the 1970s that allegedly showed a strip of land overlapping the road, claiming it justified Karen's actions. But when the judge asked whether this claim had ever been formally registered with the county recorder's office, he stammered and admitted it had not. Michelle countered with up-to-date land records proving the street had been a public right-of-way for decades, untouched by any private claim. Then came the moment that shifted the energy in the room entirely. Karen, apparently frustrated that her lawyer's bumbling wasn't winning the judge over, demanded to address the court directly. Against Raymond's frantic headshakes, the judge allowed it, with the caveat that if Karen spoke, she would be held to the same standards as any other witness. Karen launched into a tirade, painting herself as a protector of community values, accusing Anna of being a disruptive, selfish city girl who brought chaos to a peaceful neighborhood. She insisted that Anna had provoked the situation by allowing strangers, meaning the paramedics, to use her road without permission. It was a disaster. Under cross-examination by Michelle, Karen admitted she had placed the trailer in the road specifically because she didn't want those people rolling up and down like they owned the place. She admitted that she had prepared the private property signs months earlier, intending to use them if necessary. She even admitted with a pride that chilled the blood that she had no regrets about what she had done that day. When Michelle asked her directly if she understood that her actions delayed life-saving medical care, Karen shrugged and said, "If you don't follow the rules, you face consequences." Those words, uttered with such callousness, hung in the air like a thick, toxic fog. The judge recessed the hearing, stating she would issue a preliminary ruling within a few days. As they gathered their materials, Michelle leaned into Anna and whispered, "That was the best thing that could have happened." She convicted herself with her own mouth. Anna nodded, feeling a strange, heavy mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, anger, even a deep, exhausted kind of satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, however, the reality of the fight reasserted itself quickly. Karen stormed past them, muttering curses under her breath, then turned suddenly and hissed loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "This isn't over, sweetheart. People like you don't belong here." Anna said nothing. Michelle gently touched her elbow and guided her away, whispering, "Let her talk. She's digging her own grave." Back at the hospital, Richard showed small signs of improvement. He was conscious now, though weak, and smiled faintly when Anna entered the room. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but warned that recovery would be slow and difficult. Anna sat with him, holding his hand, telling him softly that everything was being taken care of, that he didn't need to worry. Inside, however, she knew the battle was still very much alive. Karen, humiliated but not defeated, would lash out again. She wasn't someone who accepted loss gracefully. She was a cornered animal now, dangerous in her desperation. In the days following the hearing, Anna noticed small, petty acts of sabotage. Deep scratches appeared along the side of her car. Her trash cans were knocked over and strewn across the street. Someone left a dead squirrel on her porch, grotesquely arranged like some crude warning. She documented everything, every incident, forwarding it all to Michelle and the local authorities, building an ironclad record. Anna refused to retaliate, refused to stoop to Karen's level. Every petty act only strengthened her case. Every piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin Karen was hammering together with her own hands. And yet, late at night, sitting alone in her living room with the soft hum of the medical equipment keeping her father stable in the next room, Anna sometimes found herself gripped by doubt. What if Karen escalated beyond harassment? What if one day it wasn't scratches or dead animals, but something worse? She fortified the house as best she could. Additional locks, motion sensor lights, security cameras covering every angle. She was no longer willing to assume the best of people. She had seen how thin the veneer of civility could be when threatened. Still, beneath the fear, there was a steady, unbreakable core inside her now. Karen had underestimated her from the beginning, seeing only a polite young woman, easily intimidated, easily bullied. But Anna had endured greater storms than this. She had buried her mother, rebuilt her life from nothing, and now fought tooth and nail for the father who had always stood by her. She would endure this too, and when the time came, she would not just survive, she would win. The days following the hearing brought no peace. If anything, Karen's anger turned into something colder, more methodical, as if she had realized that crude acts of vandalism would not be enough to break Anna. The next move was smarter, more insidious. One morning, Anna received a thick envelope in the mail from the county assessor's office. Inside was a formal notice stating that an anonymous complaint had been filed, questioning the structural compliance of her property, specifically citing the newly installed wheelchair ramps and widened pathways as unpermitted modifications. The implications were severe. If her modifications were deemed non-compliant, Anna could face substantial fines or even forced removal of the installations that were essential for her father's mobility. Anna's hands tightened around the letter, the paper crumpling slightly under her grip. It was a targeted attack, exploiting the very measures she had put in place to keep her father alive and safe. But Anna was prepared. Michelle had warned her that Karen might attempt to weaponize local bureaucracy against her. Together, they had already gathered every permit, every inspection report, every email thread with the city planning department. Anna drove straight to the municipal building, met with the compliance officer assigned to the case, and laid out her documentation before he could even ask a single question. After carefully reviewing the paperwork, the officer apologized for the inconvenience and assured her that the complaint would be closed without further action. Still, Anna couldn't shake the bitter taste in her mouth. The fact that someone could so easily trigger an invasive investigation with a few false claims was a reminder of how fragile safety could be when the system itself could be turned into a weapon. Meanwhile, Karen was busy sowing deeper seeds of division among the neighbors. Flyers began appearing on doorsteps, crudely printed manifestos warning that Anna's home was becoming a safety hazard and that increased ambulance activity would lower property values. Anna watched from her window one evening as Karen waddled from mailbox to mailbox, stuffing the papers inside with a grim determination. Some neighbors threw the flyers away without reading them. Others, uncertain, began to look at Anna's house with wary eyes, as if danger itself might be contagious. It was a slow poison, and Anna could feel its effect seeping into the edges of her life, isolating her one quiet conversation at a time. One afternoon, a city inspector showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, claiming he was following up on community concerns about overgrown vegetation and sidewalk obstructions. Anna gritted her teeth but remained polite, walking him around the property, answering his questions, providing maintenance records. The inspector seemed embarrassed, clearly realizing the call was baseless but still obligated to conduct his survey. After he left, Anna sat on her porch steps and stared out at the quiet street, wondering how many more battles she would have to fight just to live in peace. It wasn't just Karen anymore. It was the slow, grinding attrition of being treated like an intruder in your own home. Then came the escalation Anna had feared most. Late one night, long after Richard had drifted into a fitful sleep, Anna's phone buzzed with an alert from her security system. Someone was moving through her backyard. She slipped silently out of bed, grabbing the small flashlight she kept by her nightstand, and moved to the window. Through the thin slats of the blinds, she caught a glimpse of a bulky figure stumbling through the shadows, tugging at the fence line. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to stay calm. She didn't go outside. She didn't confront them. Instead, she called the police immediately, reporting an active trespass. When the officers arrived, their lights off, their approach silent, they found no one in the backyard, but footprints were clear in the soft earth, leading from the back gate straight toward Karen's property. The officers took the report seriously, securing the perimeter, advising Anna to stay inside and lock her doors. They promised increased patrols in the area for the next few days. Still, Anna barely slept that night, lying awake listening for every creak and groan of the house, every shifting shadow on the walls. The next morning, Anna and Michelle filed for an emergency protective order against Karen, citing the escalating pattern of harassment, sabotage, and now trespassing. Michelle worked quickly and precisely, bundling evidence into an airtight argument. Security footage, police reports, witness statements, even copies of the malicious flyers. A hearing was scheduled within 48 hours. Anna barely had time to breathe between hospital visits and legal preparations, but adrenaline carried her forward, fueling her determination. At the hearing, Karen appeared disheveled and furious, clearly not expecting such a swift legal response. She protested, claiming she had no idea who had entered Anna's property, insisting she was being unfairly targeted. But the judge, now familiar with Karen's history, showed little patience for her evasions. The protective order was granted, legally prohibiting Karen from coming within 100 feet of Anna's property or making any form of contact, direct or indirect. Victory should have felt sweet, but Anna understood it was merely another battle won, not the war itself. Karen would find ways to test the boundaries, to provoke, to push. True to form, Karen didn't confront Anna directly after the order. Instead, she resorted to passive-aggressive gestures, parking her car as close to Anna's driveway as legally possible, standing at the edge of her property line to glare silently whenever Anna stepped outside, leaving cryptic, childish notes inside, plastic bags thrown onto Anna's lawn. Notes that said nothing outright threatening, but reeked of malice and pettiness. Through it all, Anna maintained her course. She refused to be baited. She documented every incident. She stayed vigilant. Every recorded infraction added weight to her eventual legal case, brick by careful brick. Michelle assured her that they were building towards something solid. A final civil lawsuit for damages that would force Karen to either face real financial consequences or perhaps finally retreat into whatever bitterness she came from. But even as Anna moved methodically through the legal processes, part of her ached with the sheer exhaustion of it. She wasn't a fighter by nature. She hadn't bought a house to engage in battles of wills with toxic neighbors. She had wanted peace, a place where her father could heal, where she could build something lasting. Instead, she found herself entrenched in a daily war of attrition against someone so petty, so vindictive, that there was no reasoning, no compromise, only endurance. Yet each new attack from Karen only hardened Anna further, refining her from the inside out into something stronger, quieter, colder. Whatever it took, she would see this through to the end. The culmination came faster than Anna had anticipated, though by then she lived in a constant state of wary expectation. It started with a letter, not the crude, spiteful notes Karen had been lobbing onto her property, but a formal summons, neatly printed, carrying the cold weight of the legal system. Karen had, in an act of breathtaking arrogance, filed a civil countersuit against Anna, accusing her of harassment, emotional distress, and deliberate damage to community harmony. It would have been almost laughable if not for the sheer audacity of it. Michelle barely contained her grim smile when she read through the filing. "She's desperate," she said simply, tapping the edge of the papers against the desk. "This is the act of someone trying to create enough smoke to obscure their own fire." Still, it meant another hearing, another day in court, another confrontation. Anna prepared meticulously, not with grand declarations, but with the same quiet thoroughness that had carried her this far. She and Michelle assembled every shred of evidence, layered the timeline of Karen's escalating behavior with clinical precision, attached police reports, emergency response delays, the protective order violations, the flyer campaigns, the inspections. Triggered by anonymous complaints, they crafted a simple, devastating narrative. Anna had been systematically targeted and endangered by Karen's actions, and each incident built logically upon the last, leaving no room for misunderstanding or manipulation. On the day of the hearing, the courthouse hummed with the low murmur of other cases filtering in and out of adjoining rooms. But inside the assigned courtroom, the air felt sharp and electric. Karen sat with Raymond Kessler again, looking somehow both defiant and brittle, as if the months of sustained conflict had frayed her from the inside. Anna didn't allow herself to look at Karen directly. She kept her focus on the judge, the documents in front of her, Michelle's steady presence beside her. The proceedings were swift but intense. Karen's lawyer tried once more to paint Anna as a troublemaker, spinning elaborate theories about Anna's supposed vendetta against a respected long-term resident. But Michelle dismantled their arguments methodically. She called the paramedics to testify about the delayed access during Richard's emergency. She presented photographic evidence of the blocked street. She submitted official records proving that Karen's claims about property lines were baseless. Then came the testimonies from neighbors. Not all of them, but enough. Quiet, firm voices recounting the flyers, the surveillance, the confrontations they had personally witnessed. Each statement added weight, hammering another nail into the coffin of Karen's credibility. When Anna finally took the stand herself, she didn't speak with anger. She spoke with clarity. She described the night her father nearly died, the helplessness she felt watching the ambulance stall at the edge of the street, the bone-deep terror as she knelt performing CPR. She didn't embellish, she didn't need to. Truth, stripped of theatrics, was its own devastating force. By the time Michelle rested their case, the courtroom was so silent, Anna could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Karen's rebuttal was a disaster. Her attempts to portray herself as a victim fell flat, coming across as petty and self-serving. Her exaggerated grievances, her wild claims about community threats, only served to underscore her instability. The judge, maintaining a stoic demeanor throughout, finally spoke after both sides had finished. Her voice was even, but there was no mistaking the steel beneath her words. She found in Anna's favor on every count. She dismissed Karen's countersuit with prejudice, meaning Karen could not refile it. She ordered Karen to pay damages for obstruction of emergency services, harassment, and emotional distress. Furthermore, she extended the protective order indefinitely, effectively cutting Karen off from any direct or indirect contact with Anna or her property. The judgment hit Karen like a blow. Her face reddened, her mouth working soundlessly as if trying to summon some final protest, but no words came. She sat frozen, an aging monument to her own spite, as the gavel fell. Anna stood slowly, gathering her papers with hands that trembled, not from fear but from the slow release of months of tension. Michelle squeezed her arm briefly, a silent congratulations. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon was bright and cold. Anna paused on the steps, breathing in deeply, the crisp air burning pleasantly in her lungs. She felt lighter, not triumphant exactly, but unburdened. This wasn't a victory parade, it was survival. It was reclamation. She turned to Michelle, who smiled and said simply, "You did good." Anna nodded. She hadn't wanted a war, she had wanted peace. But when war had been forced upon her, she had met it without compromise, without surrender. Later that evening, as Anna sat once more beside her father's bed, she told him the outcome, speaking softly so as not to tire him. Richard smiled, a faint, tired smile, and squeezed her hand. No grand words were needed between them. The simple fact that he was still there, breathing, living, was enough. Outside the hospital window, the sunset painted the sky in long strokes of gold and crimson, a reminder that even the longest, darkest battles eventually yielded to something brighter. Anna leaned back in her chair, the weight of exhaustion finally overtaking her, and closed her eyes, knowing, perhaps for the first time in many months, that they were safe again. In the weeks that followed the final judgment, a cautious kind of peace settled over Anna's life. Not sudden like a door slamming shut, but slow and deliberate, as if the world itself were testing whether it was safe to exhale. Karen, bound by the court's orders and crippled by the financial penalties levied against her, withdrew into the sullen confines of her decaying home. The once constant presence of her at the edge of Anna's property disappeared, leaving only a lingering, resentful silence. Her house, which had once been a base for petty intimidation, now stood quieter than ever, the overgrown yard and broken fence slowly becoming a monument to her defeat. Neighbors who had once been wary began to re-emerge, cautiously offering smiles and small conversations, a quiet acknowledgement of the ordeal Anna had survived. Anna didn't throw a party, didn't post triumphs on social media, didn't boast about winning. Instead, she focused on rebuilding the simple, ordinary life she had wanted from the start. She spent her mornings tending the small garden by the porch, replanting the flowers that had been trampled during months of chaos. She repaired the scratches on her car herself. Not because she couldn't afford a body shop, but because there was something healing about restoring things with her own hands. Most importantly, she devoted herself to her father's recovery, celebrating every small victory. The day he could walk a few steps unaided, the evening he managed a full meal without assistance, the first time he sat outside on the porch again, soaking in the afternoon sun. There were still bad days, of course. Traces of fear didn't vanish overnight. Sometimes she caught herself flinching at unexpected noises or double-checking the locks even though she knew the security system was intact. Healing wasn't linear, and Anna accepted that. She had learned resilience not from great speeches or dramatic moments, but from enduring quietly, steadily, without losing herself. She knew now that strength didn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like refusing to be broken by things designed to break you. One evening, as autumn bled into winter, Anna and her father sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the first hints of frost creep along the grass. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp, and for the first time in a long while, Anna allowed herself to believe it would stay that way. Her father reached out, squeezing her hand with a familiar, reassuring pressure, and she turned to him with a soft smile. They didn't need to speak. They had both lived through enough to understand the preciousness of moments like this. Simple, uneventful, profoundly peaceful. In the distance, Christmas lights began to blink on across the neighboring houses, one by one, tiny sparks of color piercing the early darkness. Anna leaned back, closing her eyes briefly, feeling the steady beat of her heart, the warmth of her father's hand, the deep, grounded certainty that they had made it through. Whatever else the future held, they were still here. They were still standing, and that, in the end, was victory enough.